This is the Modise Network as we continue discussing the supremacy of the rule of law in a constitutional democracy such as ours. And my guests this evening, Advocates Dumisa Ntsebeza and Advocate Dali Mpofu. Let me start with you, Advocate Ntsebeza, right away, because you're very much involved in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work. Many young people today in South Africa sometimes regard that as one big whitewash after the fall of apartheid in 1994. Briefly tell me how we should think and regard the TRC.
Well, I mean, I've written a number of articles and book chapters, and in a way, a book with Terry Bell, Unfinished Business, where I did a critique of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think there is a level of unfairness in the way in which it is criticized, because a lot of people expected it to do things that it could never have done. The TRC was given 18 months by the legislation, the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act, number 34 of 1995. It was given 18 months to investigate 34 years of South African history. A history that was marked by brutality, violation of gross human rights, gross violation of human rights. And in fact, I go so far as to say, whenever anybody asks me, did it achieve anything, I usually say, you know, if it achieved nothing but that after the TRC, we had now more facts and more knowledge about the rot, that the brutality of the area of hostilities when Poto and Umkhondosis were declared in 1960 and 1994, when Mandela was kept president, there was a lot of struggle, of violence and gross violations of human rights. And in that period, we had now more facts after the TRC than we would have had it not been for the TRC.
Well, let's hear from the chairperson of the TRC, Archbishop Tutu, what his take is on this matter.
We really need to find a way of, one, acknowledging we are damaged. Not just white people, but black, all of us in this country were horrendously affected by apartheid.
Well, those are the views as expressed by the Archbishop. To one question, though, that keeps coming up when the talk is about the TRC is that of reparations, and I think it was considered at some point, and I'll come back to you, Advocate, in a moment. Just briefly, Dali Mpofu, what do you think about the question of reparations? People feel it did not go far enough. Some compensation of sorts, substantially more than what was offered, should have been given.
Oh yes, well that's one of the sticky issues, because it's quite true that even in terms of its core mandate of truth and reconciliation, it didn't go far enough for the reasons that Advocate Ntsebeza has explained, the duration of the time, just the sheer amount of work that it had to do. And if the intention was to give us a cross-section of what had happened, then obviously it achieved its work. But if it was to deal with all the violations, it's far from it. And I don't think it was capable of doing so. The area of reparations, on the other hand, is where, quite frankly, nothing was done at all. And that was despite the best efforts of some of the people who were involved in the TRC. So there, it's not a question of the glass is half full or half empty. Absolutely nothing was done. So it was a dismal failure to that extent. And it will remain a sticky point. And I don't think...
And I think it informs the current debate now on land and other issues relating to that, because people feel that, yeah, so what? We attained political freedom, we've got a constitution that's regarded as the best in the world, and so what when the majority of people are excluded from participating meaningfully or even owning assets in the nation? So in as far as the land question is concerned, my question, also given the ANC's land summit recently, which said that you don't need to amend the Constitution for that. And the EFF is arguing that you need to amend the Constitution. What's your view, Advocate Ntsebeza?
No, I mean, look, really, for the same reason, that, you know, there was no will. The issue is the political will. Just to piggyback on what Dali had said, in the TRC, we made a recommendation for those identified people who were victims. And we said, look, for the next 6 years, these people must receive a token amount of about 2,500 rand a month for 6 years. Not as compensation, but as a token of them regaining their dignity that they had lost through the victimhood that they had suffered. And I know from some of the relationships I have with industry that there were companies that were ready to sign checks in anticipation of the government of the day accepting that recommendation. And what did they do? In the end, you know, I mean, that would have cost about 3 billion rand if they had, over time, over 6 years, they gave those victims an insulting amount of 30,000 rand there once off. There was no political will.
Okay?
Well, same thing with the land.
So from your point of view, it's political will first, not necessarily amendment to the Constitution.
I mean, they should have done what is all right. I think the motion for compensation with, I mean, for expropriation without compensation was tabled by the EFF. He will speak for the EFF. But from what I can see, they tabled that because there was inaction.
Okay.
Within the confines of Section 25 of the Constitution.
And test that to see whether it can work or not. And one of the viewers has sent us this question. I would like us to take a look at it, and it's for you, Advocate Mpofu.
Sanibonani, igama ngu-Andisiwe kaBolsiki, ndilapha eJoburg. Bendicela ukubuza apho ku-Advocate Dali Mpofu ukuba if ANC irhuqa ngonyawo kule ndawo yomhlaba kuba ANC ime kule section 25 indaba emalunga nomhlaba, bendicela ubuka amanyathelo mani EFF ezawathatha if ANC izimisele urhuqa enyawo and thina siyafuna umhlaba. Ndiyabulela.
Well, there you are. But the ANC would argue and say, well, we've had our land summit and we're exploring a couple of approaches to this, and we will be consulting with traditional leaders and a whole number of things. But that's your question.
Yes. Well, I'd like to say to that viewer, the ANC iyalurhuqa now. In other words, it's not a question of if the ANC drags its feet. The ANC is dragging its feet.
Yeah.
There is no question about it. Tim, this question is very simple. The Constitution as it stands now, you can read it, the person who phoned can read it. You don't have to be a lawyer. Says that in order for you to do a land redistribution, there must be compensation. Okay, there must be compensation. It speaks of an amount. An amount, you and I, in simple English, means there must be money paid. The courts have interpreted that section as follows, to say the starting point must be market value, and then you can check whether you must pay below or above. What is that? Compensation. So there is this idea that you can have land expropriation without compensation with Section 25 being left intact is nonsensical and absurd. It can never happen. So I say to my friends who say that is possible, I say, okay, let's assume that is possible and it's just ambiguous. Then let's make it clear. What's wrong with making it clear that...
but here's the question from the viewer, right? The viewer wants to know, if you say the ANC,
that's not if.
They're dragging their feet on the matter, what is EFF going to do?
Well, the EFF will do what it has done now. Remember, 3-4 years ago, this issue was off the table. And the EFF, through action in parliament, in the courts, everywhere in the streets, has brought that into the national psyche. That is what that was what forced the ANC with its dragged feet to even adopt that constitution. And now they are backpedaling on the resolution. It's the people, it's not the EFF, it's the people of South Africa who are going to resolve this issue. In next year's election, my prediction is that that election is going to be a referendum on the question of land.
Okay.
If you want the land, you're going to vote for the EFF. If you don't want the land and want another 300 years of dragging, vote for the ANC. It's very simple.
There's a good politician for you. So you're invited as a lawyer, but already
you asked me. you asked me the question. Yeah. No, but on a serious note,
yes.
The question of land.
Yes.
Going back to the broad topic. You cannot have, I've always had this discussion with Advocate Ntsebeza.
Well, let's pick up that conversation in a moment. When we come back, we'll continue with that, because in any event, it's a big issue.
It's a huge
It's going to be alive for some time to come.
That's right.
And still ahead on the Modise network, we will be talking about judicial commissions of inquiry as well. And we've noticed that many of the commission's findings, recommendations are never implemented, not unless we're not paying attention, but we'll explore that in a moment. Be part of our conversation using the hashtag Modise network and tweet me at Tim Modise. We'll be back in a moment.